divorce, I stayed with my mom in a big mansion. But then my mom decided to marry this guy who was horrible to me. He always called me a brat and made me clean up after him. So when they wanted to get married, I told my mother that it's either gonna be me or him. But then she chose him. So I decided that I will move to live with my dad. At that point in my life, I haven't seen my dad in 15 years. And on top of that, he lived in a different state. I flew there, and when I met him, I was actually disgusted. He smelled, and his home was messy and dirty. On top of that, my dad lived in a small village. He didn't own any electronics, and everything he used was ancient. He didn't even have Wi-Fi in the house. The next morning, my dad drove me in his old truck to my new school. And when I entered the school, everything looked pretty weird. I've been going my whole life to an elite school. You could say that it was pretty fancy. But this one, well, it had rats running around the hallways, it smelled, and the people there looked homeless. When it was time to introduce myself in class, everyone was staring at me. I told them my name is Clara, and I just moved to town. But then one guy screamed, "How convenient for a hot girl like you to move to this cold-ass town." All the boys laughed, and they looked at me and smirked. I sat at the back of the class trying to keep a low radar. But when the chemistry class came, I got partnered up with a guy named Steven. Steven kept flirting with me and mentioning how hot I looked. But when he asked for my number, I refused to give it to him. So he spilled some blue liquid on my chest and said it was by accident. I freaked out and took my shirt off quickly because I didn't want this liquid from the lab to harm my skin. I tried to cover myself in my notebook so no one would see my bra, but they did. And the whole class started laughing. I was so embarrassed. But then, I felt a hand grab me. I looked over, and it was a guy who I never saw before. He covered me with his jacket and asked me to come with him. I had no other choice, so I did as he told me. We left class and he gave me a napkin to dry out my tears. He told me, "The guys here are pigs. You better watch out," and he just walked away. I didn't even get a chance to ask him his name or say thank you. The next day when I came to school, I wore a black hoodie and tried to hide my face because I didn't want to talk to anyone. But then one of the guys came up to me and said, "Hey, Clara, I couldn't help but notice that you have a really nice cleavage. I mean, I saw what you were hiding in there yesterday, and man, it was real nice. You are so hot. I would love to take you out sometime. What do you say?" "Move out of my way, asshole," I screamed. But then another guy named Mark came up to me and said, "Why are you playing hard to get? Girls here would die to go out with any of us." And he gave a smirk to the guy standing next to him. "Please just leave me alone," I screamed again. But then one of the other guys came and put his arm around my shoulder and said, "This is not how you approach a girl like her. You just need to show her some lovin'." And he squeezed me hard against his body and refused to let go. I wanted to scream for help, but I knew that I had no friends here and no one would come to help me. But suddenly, I saw the same mysterious guy who had helped me the day before. He stood next to me and told the boys to leave me alone. "She loves the attention. Just go away, weirdo," Mark told him. But then, this mysterious guy grabbed Mark and punched him in the face so hard, I thought Mark would get up and punch him back since he was a buffed guy. But then I saw Mark crying. All the boys had left, and I stayed alone there, staring at this guy. Thank you," I said, but he didn't reply and started walking away. I ran after him and asked him to wait, but he didn't want to talk to me. When I got home after school, I was shocked to see that my dad was with a woman. When I came in, they both looked surprised, and my dad asked why I was home so early. Did he like to forget when I finished school? The woman was wearing trashy clothes. She looked like a total hoe, and I didn't really want to think about what she did with my dad, so I went upstairs to my room without eating anything. I sat in my room, and I was having a miserable night. I couldn't believe that my life turned out this way. But that's when I noticed that there was someone standing outside watching me in the dark. I opened my window and shouted, "Hey you! I see you! Come out of the bushes!" A minute passed before the person showed himself. It was the mysterious guy. "Oh, that's you. What are you doing here?" I asked him. It took him time before he said, "I just wanted to make sure that you were safe." I told him to come up to my room so we could have a proper chat, and he did. He sat on my bed, and I asked him for his name. He said that it was Nate. I asked him why he was trying to keep me safe, and then he said, "I like you, Clara. I think that you're a special girl." I was stunned. It felt amazing because I, too, had feelings for him. I mean, he was so hot. So I told him, "I like you too, Nate." And I leaned in to kiss, and he kissed me back. I cannot describe the feeling I had when his lips touched mine. We started making out on the bed and his hands were all over my body, and I wanted more of him, so I started taking his clothes off, but then he stopped me and backed off. "What's wrong?" I asked. But Nate seemed disturbed. He then said that he cannot see me again and that I should never talk to him. I asked him why, and he said, "I can't date you. Don't ask too many questions." And he got out of the window and just left. I couldn't believe why Nate would do that. I was so upset that I cried all night. The next day at school, my eyes looked puffed and my face looked tired, but as I was walking down the hallway, the same group of guys came to hit on me. They started bothering me again, and this time, Mark held my hand and kissed it. I wanted to puke. But then Nate came and told Mark to leave me alone. But I was pissed with Nate, so I told him to piss off. Then I grabbed Mark and kissed him in front of Nate. Nate said nothing and just walked away. His reaction was weird, but whatever. Everything about him was weird anyway. As for Mark, he got so excited that I let him kiss me, and his friends started cheering him with disgusting language that I cannot mention here. From that day, Mark and I started dating. I didn't really like him, but at least that way, other guys left me alone. At the beginning, dating Mark wasn't that awful, but then I found out he was cheating on me with other girls after I caught an STD. When I confronted him, he just laughed and said that STDs are not a real thing, and that I was lucky to even be with him. I couldn't believe how rude he was. I told him I was breaking up with him and slammed the door in his face. The next day, I went to the same clinic where they did my tests, and luckily, my STD was treatable, and all I had to do was take antibiotics. When I left the doctor's office, I was surprised to see Nate standing outside in the parking lot. So embarrassing. Now he'll know that I was getting checked for an STD. I went to say hi, but then the same disgusting woman my dad is came and stood next to Nate. She had a cigarette in her hand, and then she told him that she was done with her tests. I wanted to puke. But then Nate tells me, "Meet my mother, Margaret." I was shocked. That horrible woman was his mother? Ugh. Margaret then started screaming at Nate. "Are you gonna let me stand there all day? Move your ass now!" And then Nate got into his car and drove her off. Next day I tried to find Nate at school, so I waited for him next to his locker. When he saw me, he told me that we shouldn't talk, but I insisted that we go to the back of the school and talk in private. "I understand why you didn't want to see me now. Your mom was giving services to my dad." Nate looked embarrassed and said, "You shouldn't have known about that." "I want to be with you. I don't care," I told him. I leaned in to kiss him, but he stopped me and screamed, "Just leave me alone! Your dad is an asshole, and he ruined my life." And then he left. I was shocked. What was the deal with my dad? When I went home, I got into my dad's room and started searching for anything that could give me answers. And what I found left me speechless. There was a bag filled with cash, which looked about $3 million. On top of that, there was a notebook that had Margaret's name on it, and inside of it, there were detailed calculations of the share of her money. This was so disgusting. My dad was actually the person getting Nate's mother into the business? I went to my room and I started packing my stuff. I was going to leave this house. I took the bag of money on my way out, and I went to Margaret's address that I found to see Nate. I stood under Nate's bedroom, and I started throwing tiny rocks at his window. Finally, Nate noticed me, and I went up to his room. I told him that I found all about my dad and that I wanted to run away. Then I showed him the bag of cash I had and asked him to run away with me. For the first time, I saw Nate smiling at me, and before I knew it, he started kissing me and said, "Yes, I'll run away with you," and we drove off to another city. We found a small apartment, and Nate started working to support us. Our parents tried to contact us, but we didn't answer their calls or texts. We were finally free of them. Until one day, Nate never came home after work, and I was super worried about him. He didn't answer his phone, so I went to his workplace to look for him. But when I opened the door, my dad was standing in front of me. He said that Nate was not coming back, and that I should get my stuff and get going before he hurts him. He then showed me a picture of Nate looking hurt. My father was a dangerous man, and I was afraid that he'll do anything to Nick. So I did what he wanted, and I went back home with him. My father took back all the money we stole from him and forced me to go back to school. But I wasn't allowed to talk to Nate. Nate and I couldn't risk it, because we knew that my father had people watching us. So we usually left each other messages that we snuck into each other's lockers. We planned to wait until we turn 18, so we can finally run away together and never look back. But until then, I had to bear with this reality.